would say he actually objected to using hazard ratios, confidence intervals to test hypotheses. So the lesson learned for me was to do not use confidence intervals for hypothesis testing. Now let's talk about your paper 2 and 3. And in paper 2 you use the Wigglesworth, the revised Wigglesworth. And the paper is written by Keeling et al. And Wigglesworth is number 3 on the authors list. What was the rationale for your use of that?
Yeah, why I decided to use the Wigglesworth, because in the birth registry, actually children were given one or more diagnoses, and actually how it's supposed to be in the form, it should be primary, secondary, and tertiary diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, they are not writing them in sequence, which one was a primary and which one was secondary diagnosis. So some of the children had 3, some of them 2, or some 1 reason.
Mm-hmm.
And for this case, we had more than 10 causes of admissions. So for me, I wanted to see actually which really may be cause specific of death. That's why I had to find a classification,
Mm-hmm.
which by looking at the categories and trying to classify all the causes, I might find some few causes of death which may be actually good for targeting in future, preventions and even,
not prevention, but for improving care.
Yeah, for
improving care. I think that was the main aspect of it. Well, this is just browsing through it, but you have these Wigglesworth, and then you have they're looking at 5 areas actually.
Yeah.
And I go back to my presentation. Oops. They group them and say group 1, 2, 3, and 4 and 5, and miscellaneous is just the remainder of antepartum stillbirth and the attention they could pay to antenatal care, congenital malformations, preconceptional care, deaths associated with asphyxia, neonatal intensive care, and intrapartum asphyxia. So that it has a strict aim for treatment or kind of intervention. On the other hand, you have some funny thing about this study also is that it was actually a reliability study where physicians in pairs checked the cause of death, and then transferred it more or less into some elements of improved care for the pregnant women and the delivery. But it was an observer reliability study, and they looked at or re-examined 239 births, and there was no census in 4% of the cases, and changes in classifications were made in 1 out of 12. Do you remember when the original Wigglesworth was issued? This was 1989.
Yes, 1980.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good. So that's probably why Mr. Wigglesworth was relegated to 4th place so they had to revise it in the first place. But they made changes in 1 out of 12. And the inter-observer variability was 15%, which is quite extensive, isn't it? Yeah. But what they had to have the coding done by other trained personnel than doctors, who are swayed by previous experience rather than adhering to guidelines, however precise. So what do you do in your birth registry? Who enters the information into the birth registry?
Yeah, it's a nurse. Who enters?
Yeah, who enter?
Is a secretary.
Secretary?
Yeah, who is not a midwife.
So she can adhere to guidelines in a better way than physicians can. Is that what you say? And I think this is the message here. Don't have these biased physicians do whatever they think is because they tended to stay with their own classification regardless of the fact that they had revised the classifications. So these 6 authors, we say in this paper, they kind of did whatever they'd done before because they were swayed in a way, so they were kind of biased. Now I have this other classification called the NICE. What can you say? What's the nature of that classification? Is it similar to the one this validation study? What kind of a nature is that?
Yeah.
Well, it says in the title, the E.
The E in Italian.
The E, etiology.
Etiology.
Yeah, they're looking for the E, the etiology. So they have some kind of an etiology perspective, not as much as the clinical care perspective. You have, of course, read this paper, but I'll pull it out as well. There's a new cause of death classification 10 years later in 1998 by some Swedes. How would you pronounce the last name of the first author?
I pronounce it Winbo.
Winbo, yes. Very nice. Because first when I first read it, and I didn't know it was a Swede, I would say Winbo. But then no, that's something else. But that's a totally different approach. As it's saying in the material, the original study was restricted to the years 1983 to 1990 and comprised 6,000 stillbirths and neonatal deaths before 28 days, out of a total 836,000. So they had a computer-based approach that was much, much different from the validation study where 2 and 2 sat down in pairs and tried to disentangle what was the real cause of death. The nice thing about this is, it's much more comprehensive. It's got 13 categories, and number 13 is again the unclassifiables, cases not in groups 1 to 12. But the nice thing I can show you here is that in this table 5, they put up the kind of the comparison between the two of them. And the authors themselves put emphasis on the asphyxia group, which 845, according to Wigglesworth, they were kind of boiled down, still left with 522. But they had the possibility to change the classification to some kind of etiological causes, yes. Multiple births, maternal disease, unexplained small for days infants, but in particular the placental abruption and the obstetric complications. So they could kind of detail the cause of death based on the etiology. But what they do then is to go back. Oops, that's not mine. They go back and they conclude the Wigglesworth classification has fewer groups than the NICE classification, which is directed more towards the underlying biological causes of death. Whereas the Wigglesworth aims at identifying areas of healthcare provision most in need of alteration, that we agree on. But then they go on, for example, with the NICE model, the placental abruption is identified as a cause of death, not the intrauterine death, asphyxia, immaturity. So they kind of reclassify based on the underlying situation. Not the asphyxia, not the immaturity, not the intrauterine death, but the placental eruption that lie behind it. So multiple birth as well as maternal disease as important causes of immaturity and intrauterine death can be disentangled by NICE. And thus, even when the aim of a classification of cause of death would be to improve maternal care during the pregnancy, the NICE classification has advantages, since this classification highlights the association between some maternal condition or obstetric complications with infant death, which might lead to additional preventive activity. So where am I going now? I'm going to say, when you do your next study, and this is a leading question, would you still go with the Wigglesworth, or would you prefer to use the nice?
Yeah, because I think the Wigglesworth, I prefer to use it because it will give me more of the conditions which are good to be targeted for preventive, not for treatment. Because for the Wigglesworth, then after the condition has occurred, that means you need them for provisional, improve provision of care. So it's better to go for the prevention rather than for the treatment first. So when we prevent, it's much better. And then, so I think I'll go for the nice classification to identify.
Yeah, I was a little uncertain at one point that you would go for the Wigglesworth, but I would say that the nice is giving you the better of both worlds.
Yeah.
Am I convincing you?
You say?
I think the nice one, the nice classification, would be the preferred one, because you get.
That's what I say. That
Yeah.
because it gives it the
Exactly.
condition which I need to be preventive rather than to wait till when they cause harm and then you go for the condition to treat. So the nice one
we agree. Thank you. Do you know these guys?
The Beatles.
It's a blurred picture, but you have these young gentlemen in the middle behind the drum. It's four musicians called the Beatles, but the one to the left and the one to the right are now deceased. The two in the middle are still alive, and that's one of the landmark events in my life when that record was released. And I remember exactly what I was doing at the time when I heard it first.
Okay.
And this is the chorus of the title song. It's very nice because it says, Sergeant Pepper's lonely, Sergeant Pepper's lonely, Sergeant Pepper's lonely, Sergeant Pepper's lonely, Sergeant Pepper's one and only Lonely Hearts Club Band. It's so hard to say it in such a fast time, but it says also, it's getting very near the end. This is the end. And I'd like to thank you very much for a very stimulating presentation this morning, your previous presentation during this, your discussion with the first opponent, and I also want to thank you for the discussion we had.
Thank you.
You came out with flying colors, I can assure you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the second opponent. In accordance with the new procedures for the public defense adopted by the faculty board 7th of November last year, the committee will now withdraw to evaluate the public defense. The committee will then return and announce the results to you. The audience is asked to stay for the announcements. Okay?